Hi, I'm Dan and welcome to Polar Currency and video number 47, my top 10 large-size dollar banknotes, part 2. See the description below for a link to part 1 if you haven't seen that. For this video, I'll reveal my top 5 notes. Keep in mind my rankings are primarily based on the story and history that's part of the banknote. Appearance does come into play, but only about 20%. I didn't like splitting up the list, but I'm trying to make some of my videos shorter. Not much else to say, and I hope you enjoy looking deeper into the banknotes besides just the front and back. We'll start with a review of the notes ranked in Part 1.
Number 10. The 1923 $1 United States note or legal tender note was the last design of large-sized $1 legal tenders. Number 9. The 1861 Merchants Bank of Trenton, New Jersey obsolete remainder note that was issued during the U.S. Civil War. Number 8. The 1891 Treasury Note with Lincoln Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton and the best beard on U.S. currency. Number 7. The Mexico Revolutionary Note issued in 1915 by the state government of Chihuahua. The note packs a lot of Mexican history and maybe it got a higher ranking because it's blue. Number 6. Because I have a thing for Canadian currency and I've clearly learned that it's Canada Goose and not to ever again call them Canadian Goose. That was numbers 10 through 6, and now let's get to the top 5. Number 5. The Dayton Bank of St. Paul, Minnesota Territory 1850s obsolete remainder note, Kelly Book number MN 730-05, makes my top 5 because 1, it's from my home state and county that I live in, and 2, it's a classic example of failed banks of the obsolete banknote era. According to a history and catalog of Minnesota obsolete banknotes and script by author R. Sean Hewitt, the bank's namesake, Lyman C. Dayton, was a successful wholesale dry goods business owner that started in Rhode Island and expanded to New York and New Orleans. In 1849, Dayton sold all of his holdings and moved to St. Paul. By 1856, he was a highly successful real estate dealer, and he decided to open up his own bank. The Dayton Bank had its own currency printed in $1, $2, and $5 denominations by Danforth, Wright and Company of New York and Philadelphia. But Dayton's timing was terrible. One of the largest recessions hit, known as the Panic of 1857, and the Dayton Bank went under and was a typical example of numerous banks across the country. Changing gears, because I'm that guy that can't leave it alone, Lyman Dayton had to suffer from a pretty good case of narcissism. I mean, he put his own portrait on every single note. He also must have been quite the dandy for his time to sport that hairdo. I mean, that curl thing is something else. People thought the 1970s had bad hairdos. This $1 obsolete note features Dayton at the center, flanked by vignettes of mothers with children, Native Americans on the left and European settlers on the right. To the far left are 2 Native American men who should be Dakota or Ojibwe but probably aren't illustrated correctly at all. The far right corner has a small vignette of a farmer driving cattle along a road. Notice the detail with the telegraph wire. That's pretty cool. Few, if any, of the notes saw circulation. Almost all of the collectible banknotes today are remainders or notes that were never issued. In 1859, various banknote reports, and yes, there were multiple publications that tracked the value of money during those days, listed them as worthless. The remainder is uniface with nothing printed, very typical for obsolete banknotes. Number 4. One of the classic large-size banknotes is the Series 1899 $1 silver certificate, otherwise known as the Black Eagle. This note ranks number 16 in the 100 Greatest American Currency Notes book by Q. David Bowers and David M. Sunman. This is Friedberg number 236, and according to the Whitman Encyclopedia of U.S. Paper Money by Q. David Bowers, there were a combined total issue of 3.6 billion that were issued until possibly 1927. A beautiful note highlighted by the decorative one on the left, the large scallop treasury seal on the right, along with the serial numbers that are all printed in that amazing blue color. The note was hastily put into production, replacing the very short-lived Series 1896 silver certificate. More on that later. The overall engraving is credited to G.F.C. Smiley, but the eagle was originally engraved by James Bannister and first appeared on the 1863 $10 compound interest-bearing Treasury Note. Smiley varied the design just slightly. It's the only U.S. currency with two presidents on the front. The engraving of 16th President Abraham Lincoln by Charles Byrd is based on a photograph by Anthony Berger first used on the Series 1869 $100 legal tender note. Smiley did engrave 18th President Ulysses S. Grant's portrait, which is used only this one time. Grant faces right on all subsequent notes. It also marks Grant's first appearance on U.S. currency and the only time that he's not on a 50. This note is signed by Harley Spielman and Frank White, who served together as Register of the Treasury and U.S. Treasurer from 1923 to 1927. A little bit about Frank White. He was governor of North Dakota. White also served as a major during the Spanish-American War and was awarded the Silver Star for bravery during combat, and later a colonel in World War I, but he didn't serve in combat. He was a little too old. There's little information about Harvey Spielman other than he was from Ohio, and his term abruptly ended in 1927, a little bit too soon, when President Calvin Coolidge replaced him with Walter O. Woods. The reverse continues the trend of creating white space to show the red and blue security threads embedded in the paper. During this period of production, the threads ran in vertical stripes in the middle thirds of the paper. It wouldn't be until the small size Series 1928 where the threads were embedded throughout the paper. Most reverses during this time were designed to highlight the two areas. This design trend continued through the 1923 series. Number 3. The iconic 1896 Silver Certificate, Friedberg number 224, the first note of the educational series and a complete departure from traditional Bureau of Engraving and Printing design. The note is titled History Instructing Youth, with history pointing to Washington, D.C. in the distance. Cool to see the Washington Monument, which had recently been completed in 1888. Construction of the obelisk started in 1848. The detail is unbelievable in the panoramic view, and it continues to the right with the open book displaying the U.S. Constitution, which you can actually read. Amazing! The border displays the names of 23 prominent Americans that include politicians, writers, inventors, and explorers. The Treasury seal has been reduced in prominence in the lower right corner and would be the last silver certificate series to use a red seal. There is so much to say about this short-lived banknote and series, which included the $2 and $5 denomination and almost a 10. But I'm going to take a minute to answer this question. Why was the educational series, credited as being the most beautiful banknotes that the U.S. ever created, discontinued after only 2 years? A popular narrative that does have merit is that the Series 1896 $5 silver certificate was offensive given the lack of clothing that the allegory figure Electricity was wearing. In a 1980 article, the 1897 Educational Notes in the Society of Paper Money Collectors November-December Journal, author Gene Hessler writes, Anthony Comstock, self-appointed keeper of the public morals and president of the Watch and Ward Society, complained to the Treasury Department, quote, that the figure of Electricity was lewd and immoral, end quote. Hessler goes on to state, quote, there is no absolute proof that the government withdrew these notes because of the outcry of Mr. Comstock, end quote. This is not the last time a department of the U.S. Treasury had clothing issues. The U.S. Mint took a lot of heat in 1916 for a lewd and immoral quarter. But wardrobe malfunctions were not the main problem with the educational series. Hessler goes on to quote from the newspaper The New York Sun in January of 1897, quote, the elaborately designed new silver certificates have not won the popular success that was hoped for by the authorities in Washington. The first objection is that the different denominations are not nearly so readily distinguishable as in the former issues. In the matter of the $5 certificate, this criticism is serious. It can easily be mistaken for a $2, unless great care is exercised, end quote. Continuing the quote, the second objection is that the great mass of engraving adds much to the difficulty of deciphering the different denominations. This is the most serious objection urged against the new certificates. The new certificates, said the cashier of a big bank downtown, are an absolute nuisance when they get soiled from use. It's next to impossible to decipher the numerals when the certificates are completely worn. End quote. To sum up, the main reason for the withdrawal is the notes didn't perform well once they became circulated and were difficult to read and hard to use in commerce. The notes also became smudged. The 100 Greatest American Currency Notebook makes note of this, stating, quote, the bills became smudgy and suspicious looking with little use, end quote. So sadly, the educational series was canceled, ushering in the new Series 1899 silver certificates, and they did happen fast. The front was designed by Will Hickok Lowe, a well-known muralist, illustrator, and decorative painter. The note was engraved by Charles Schlecht, a German-born engraver, most well-known for stamps and banknotes, who had a long and illustrious career with the BEP and the American Banknote Company. With all the problems, the 1896 $1 silver certificate ranks number 7 on the top 100 notes. The notes are signed by Register of the Treasury J. Fount Tillman and U.S. Treasury Daniel N. Morgan. I'm divided about the reverse. Part of why this note doesn't rank higher for me. I'm disappointed the design went back to the old style of covering every aspect with ink. Certainly the engraving work is beautiful, but I expected more, like the front. The upper left and right corners are stunning with the allegorical angel figures behind a shield stating 1. What's impressive is that they're not the same, but two different figures, with the left bearing a wreath made of cotton and the right with a laurel wreath. But what's fantastic is that Martha Washington makes her second consecutive appearance on currency and the $1 silver certificate. Only this time on the reverse, along with husband and first President George Washington. The reverse also has the lamest pun ever attributed to U.S. currency. Here's how it goes. No one should separate George and Martha Washington. I've got nothing else. If you don't get it, we just have to move on. Number 2. The 1862 legal tender note Friedberg number 16 ranks second on my list because it's the first $1 bill the U.S. federal government ever issued and has just a ton of history attached to it. It bears the portrait of Salmon P. Chase, whose very idea was for the U.S. to issue paper money. Chase was also only the second of 6 people to be living while he was on currency. Not enough time to explain that, but see the description below for my video, The Face of Currency, why you have to be dead to be on U.S. money. But here's the quick review related to Chase. When the U.S. Civil War broke out, the Union didn't have 2 things. 1, there wasn't nearly enough circulating hard currency, meaning gold and silver, an issue that plagued the country for the first 100 years. And 2, there wasn't enough money to pay for the war. The Confederacy was in even worse financial shape. Citizens began hoarding gold and silver, and the costs of the war began to spiral out of control. Quickly, the U.S. government was on the brink of bankruptcy. So enter Salmon P. Chase, former governor of Ohio, who was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1860 but only served 2 days. President Abraham Lincoln convinced him to be the Secretary of Treasury, so he resigned, again just after 2 days. I don't think he did this out of patriotism, but for a promise to be made later from Lincoln. Chase got down to work and put together a plan. I'm going to be really simplistic here, so bear with me. Chase got 3 pieces of legislation passed by Congress. The first was the Act of July 17, 1861, that created demand notes. But this was literally only a Band-Aid. The second and third acts of July 11, 1862 and March 3, 1863 solved the problem, creating legal tender notes, which were a fiat currency. They were nothing more than circulating federal debt, promising to pay the bearer $1 of unspecified value at some unspecified future date. That's it in a nutshell. At the end of the day, Chase's idea worked and kept the government afloat and put circulating currency into the economy. But we're not quite done with Mr. Chase. By 1864, things were steady financially, and then an opening occurred on the Supreme Court. Not just a regular justice spot, but the Chief Justice spot. Remember that promise between Lincoln and Chase? Yep, that was it. Lincoln appointed him, and Chase became the 6th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, serving until he died in 1873. But before he met his maker, a very ironic case would come across the docket of Chief Justice Chase. In 1870, Hepburn v. Griswold was heard by the Supreme Court, and it was going to be determined if legal tender notes were constitutional. Chase wrote the dissenting opinion, and speaking for the court, declared certain parts of the Legal Tender Acts, specifically the United States notes, aka legal tender notes, unconstitutional. Does the word ironic come to mind? So, when legal tenders benefited Chase as the Secretary of the Treasury, it was all sunshine. But when it came to the Supreme Court, it was a hard, flat no. Salmon P. Chase sidebar here, the guy did not age well. In 1861, he was 53, 1864, 56, and in 1873, he was 65 when he died. I mean, the man went downhill fast. End of sidebar. However, his ruling was overturned in 1871 and 1872. That's the quick and dirty version of Salmon P. Chase. But let's get back to the banknote. The note bears the signature of the very first Register of the Treasury, Lucius E. Chittenden, a politician from Vermont. And then there's the famous and flamboyant U.S. Treasurer signature of Francis E. Spinner. Spinner from New York was a general in the state militia, a former U.S. representative, and was an integral part of shaping of what would become the Bureau of Engraving and Printing and the production of paper currency. The man deserves a video all by himself. The signatures aren't very visible as they're overlaid onto a highly detailed background, probably for anti-counterfeiting purposes. According to the Encyclopedia of U.S. Paper Money, my note is a W6, the most common variation with an estimated printing of over 5.8 million. There are actually 9 W variations. The notes were printed by both the American Banknote Company and the National Banknote Company and had different name combinations that were displayed at the bottom. This note was printed by the National Banknote Company because the name is displayed twice. Some notes were printed by both companies and both names are displayed at the bottom of the note. In the lower center is a circular radial pattern with a 1, 2, and 3, with the 1 being highlighted being a $1 bill. The Series 1862 $2 bill has the same thing, leading to the thought that the government was planning on a $3 denomination, but that never happened. To the right is the original red spiked Treasury seal. The rest of the note has the center block of the United States along with the act date at center and the serial numbers overprinted on the lower left one denomination rosette and the open field in the upper right, followed by the large decorative denomination. And I can't leave the front without taking a closer look at the border. The skill level of the engraving and printing, the lathe work, the clamshell shapes that encompass a tiny, tiny 1 spelled out. I mean, that is impressive. Overall, it's a pretty good-looking note. The reverse of these first legal tender notes is what gives us the nickname greenback for U.S. currency, and the green color continues to this day. The reason for green? Well, it was cheap and available. It's just that simple. The legal disclaimer is displayed in the circular center, flanked by decorative 1s and a whole lot of detail lathe work that's highlighted by chains surrounding the 1s that have a star inside each little link along with a numerical 1 inside each ring, making the circular center border. I mean, seriously, that's so cool. All of this combined with the history is probably why the Series 1862 $1 legal tender note is ranked number 31 on the 100 Greatest American Currency Notes. That's a lot of history packed into one single note. And that was the short version. Number 1. This may surprise you and stir some comments like, "What the hell, Polar Currency?" But my favorite large-size 1 denomination is the Series 1918 Federal Reserve Banknote, or FRBN. Why? because I just like how it looks. It's a unique design that stands out from all other notes. I'm not going to get into what a FRBN is, just know that it's not a national banknote. If you want to know more, check out the description below for a link to my video, What Are FRBNs? The first reason I like the design because there aren't many notes that don't have a hard border around the portrait, and I prefer notes when the portrait is off-center. It's just a visual thing. Here's the weird part. Yeah, I know I'm weird. I'm a huge fan of the large stylized Federal Reserve Bank and denomination block in the center. I don't know why, I just am. The blue scallop seal on the right balances very well with the portrait on the left. To me, this design has a place for everything, even the 4 signatures. Most notes always have something that looks like it was forgotten and it got added in at the last minute. Also, the way the text is arched along the right side and the corner denominations, I don't know, I just really like the look of the 1915 and 1918 FRBNs. Because this note is an FRBN, there are 4 signatures instead of 2. Because similar to national banknotes, FRBNs are issued and backed by the individual Federal Reserve Bank, just like national banknotes were banked by the local bank. So both Federal Reserve Bank and federal government signatures are required. This note's federal signatures are Register of the Treasury Houston Teehee and U.S. Treasurer John Burke. And the Minneapolis Federal Reserve signatures are Cashier Seymour Cook and Governor of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve District Theodore Wold. Details on all 4 of them are also in the What Are the FRBNs video. Adding to why this note is number 1 is because of the history of the large size FRBNs, which have a tangled and fascinating story. There were 2 different series, the 1915 and 1918. They were a failed attempt to replace national banknotes. The creation of FRBNs involved unscrupulous silver mine owners, questionable politicians, I'm being nice there, a U.S. Treasury fire sale, World War I, and the minting of both the 1921 Morgan and Peace silver dollars. It's because of the history combined with the design of Friedberg number 734 that makes this my number 1 note. And we haven't even got to the reverse. And capping it all off, the reverse vignette is that of the iconic flying eagle grasping the U.S. flag that has given this FRBN the nickname the Flying Eagle or Green Eagle. National currency is repeated on the reverse over Federal Reserve banknote, again because the Treasury Department was trying to eliminate national banknotes. That's what national means. At the bottom of the reverse is the redemption clause, which I'm not reading because the video's long enough. And it's super boring. With the simplicity of the eagle, the flag, and the negative open space, it all just combines this to make one outstanding looking banknote.
And that's it for video number 47, my top 10 large size ones, part 2. I'm sure you'll disagree. In fact, I hope you do. That's what makes collecting so great. Everyone has their own opinion and collects what they like. Let me know in the comments about your thoughts, or if there is a large size 1 denomination out there that I don't know about or don't have. As always, I appreciate your time, and if you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up button, and please, if you haven't done so already, take the time to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and thanks for checking in.